Well, hi everybody. There's a lot of news out there at the moment. The advertisers been putting out that One Nation did this dirty, and that it was unfair and all this sort of stuff. And that was all to do with Provision 93 of the actual Act here in South Australia. The video that I'm going to show you just afterwards is me explaining how this actually goes and works. But please understand that this legislation works the same for every single party: Labor, Liberal, One Nation, Independence, United Australian Voice. They all benefit in exactly the same way. The only difference being that in this particular case, except for a couple of other independents, One Nation said just one in the box and fill out the rest of the preferences yourself. In other words, they're trying to teach you how to preference properly, so a lot of which some people don't understand. And as a saving grace, just like every other party has a registered ticket, they put in a registered ticket of how they would have those flows. Anyway, just for me and just for you, this is a bit of an education session so that you can understand that what you're being fed in the media right now is crap, because it goes to everybody exactly the same, but it explains it, and then you make up your own mind which way you want to see it go. All right, here it is. This is the legislation, the South Australian legislation. Okay. There's a section in here that is called Section 93, and it's all about saving the votes. For those people who don't do the voting quite correctly, this is to help them in how it's done. So it's called Interpretation of Ballot Papers, the House of Assembly. Section 93. This section applies in relation to the House of Assembly. So it basically says, where a voter marks the ballot paper by placing a number 1 in the square opposite the name of a particular candidate and indicates no further preferences, and there is a 1 voting ticket registered for the purpose of the election in relation to that candidate, the ballot paper will be taken to have been marked in accordance with the voting ticket. So that means that if you walked in and you effectively did a number 1 only on the lower house paper, that's the green paper, and if you did that for Labor, Lib, whatever, you would then, vote would count according to the registered how to vote card given to the AEC, right, to the South Australian Electoral Commission. One Nation on their how to vote cards said just a 1, but apparently they registered a proper validated preference card. I think actually I've heard they may have registered 2. So they gave it a 50-50 split between Liberal and Labor. Don't quote me on that. I might not be correct, right? But that's how that basically works. And Mark Aldridge was bringing this up. It would have been nice for One Nation to let the people know how they registered those cards, right? But it's a really smart move, because what they're doing is they're saying, hey, you guys out there, you're following us, learn how to preference, learn how to do it yourself. And in case you don't do it and you just do a 1 because you don't know how preferencing works, we're going to back ourselves up and have a preference registered, so that that vote doesn't just get thrown in the bin, it goes into our count. Now, there's probably a few polling places around the place that weren't fully aware of that piece of legislation and may have discarded those initial primary votes, but that's okay, because they will come back and get those votes and put them where they're supposed to be. Right? So could we see this preference vote from One Nation for each of the seats? Yeah, we can. But South Australian Electoral Commission has it registered, but hasn't released it to the public until after the event. Now, Mark Aldridge brought this up, sort of explaining how it went, and I went and looked it up, and Kathy, another person, also informed me of it, and thought, wow, okay. I wasn't prepared to come out and confuse the heck out of everybody just before the election. I said I would explain it afterwards. So we let that go. So it says here, Where a voter marks the ballot paper by placing a number 1 in the square opposite the name of the particular candidate and indicates no further preferences, and there are 2 voting tickets registered. So in other words, the party has given 2 voting tickets for the purpose of the election in relation to that candidate, then the ballot paper is to be grouped with other ballot papers marked in the same manner. If a number of those ballot papers is an even number, then half of them will be taken to be marked in accordance with 1 ticket and the other half in accordance with the other ticket. So that's how you get that 50-50 split. And then they obviously deal with it. If the number of the ballot papers is not an even number, one of the ballot papers will be taken to be as marked in accordance with whichever of the 2 tickets is determined by the returning officer. So he gets to pick where that last one lonely little vote will go, whether it be on that paper box or that paper box. But effectively, One Nation registered their tickets, so everybody who may have voted 1 and only 1, it's going to be moved on. If they voted 2 or 3, they will look at those other and 4 and just left it blank. I'm not sure where they stand on that, so let's see if we can find out. Where a voter marks ballot paper number 1 in the square opposite a particular name to proceed with and indicate further preferences by consecutive. A voter marks a ballot paper by placing a number 1 in the square opposite a name of a particular candidate and proceeds to indicate further preferences by consecutive numbers, and there are 2 voting tickets registered for that purpose of the election in relation to the candidate, and the preferences indicated by the voter are consistent with 1 or both of those voting tickets, and, love the ands because it's always in law, the ballot paper would, apart from the subsection, be informal. The ballot paper would, as part for this subsection, be informal. The ballot paper is, if consistent with both voting tickets, will be treated as if it has been marked as only a number 1 and dealt with in accordance as subsection 3 above. But if it is consistent with only 1 of the voting tickets, it will be taken to be marked in accordance with that voting ticket. So if they do 1, 2, 3, or 4, and their ticket, their voting ballot matches one of the 2 tickets that may have been put in by their party, assuming that there are 2 tickets, most parties only put in 1, right? It will look at that and go, well, yeah, this ticket says 1, 2, 3, 4, and it matches this guy's 1, 2, 3, 4. So therefore, it goes in that pile. And from now on, whatever's left becomes the preferences. If it doesn't, it goes back up to the number 1 and just gets split across whichever, 50-50, right? So that is subsection 93 of this act. That is how it works. That is how the votes are counted. And as long as the scrutineers are aware of this, and as long as the counting people are aware of this, it means there should be a lot less invalid votes. And we actually see that in the numbers. I can't bring that screen back up. But in the numbers we're seeing, there's a lot less invalid votes in that situation. So that's true in that part. And that can make a bit of a difference to how the voting goes as well. This is a South Australian law only. Let me make that perfectly clear, right? This only happens in the South Australian election. If this was a federal election, the vote would have been classed as invalid. And I know that because when I ran, a lot of mine ended up as invalid because the people didn't want anybody else. They just wanted us. And they did that. They marked it 1, 2, and then left the rest blank. And so we didn't get any votes. So they didn't really help us at all in that respect. And that was a bit of poor education on my behalf, probably. It's also poor education on our government system because they do not teach things correctly.